The girl stayed still, her body leaning against the rough bark of the tree, her trembling subsiding, though her eyes remained wide and alert. Koda watched her closely, his steady gaze never leaving her face. He could sense her fear, but he could also sense something else, a quiet resignation, a need for reassurance that only time and trust could heal. The wolves, always watchful, began to settle around them, their bodies forming a loose, protective circle. They did not growl, did not bark, but their presence alone was a silent promise. They would guard her, keep her safe as long as they could. Koda moved closer, lowering himself to the ground beside her. His fur, soft and warm, was a quiet comfort in the cool morning air. The girl didn't flinch when he brushed against her. She simply leaned into him, seeking the warmth of his body, feeling for the first time since she had been bound to that tree that she was not entirely alone. Koda's pack remained on high alert, their sharp eyes scanning the surrounding forest, their ears twitching with every movement in the underbrush. The forest was their home, a place they knew intimately. They knew its rhythms, its dangers. They were guardians of these woods, and now, in their eyes, the girl was one of them, not prey, not an outsider, but a fragile life to be protected. As the minutes passed, the girl's breathing steadied. The exhaustion from her ordeal weighed heavily on her small frame, but she was safe now, surrounded by the pack that had chosen to stand guard. Her fingers still tingled from where the ropes had cut into her skin, but the pain was beginning to fade. The bruises would heal. The wounds on her wrists would scar, but the emotional scars, the fear of what had brought her here, those would take longer to mend. Koda lay quietly beside her, his head resting on his paws. His amber eyes never wavered from the distant trees, his body tense, ready to spring into action at the slightest sign of danger. But for now, there was no danger, only the quiet hum of the forest, the soft rustling of leaves as the wind picked up, and the steady rhythm of the girl's breath. The pack seemed to settle into a calm routine, each wolf taking its position, their sharp eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. The girl, too, began to relax, her eyelids drooping as she fought against the pull of sleep. Koda remained alert but noticed how she seemed to lean a little closer to him, her small body seeking comfort, warmth, and safety. It was a strange thing, this trust between them. Koda, the wild wolf, and the girl, the fragile human. Yet in this moment, it was undeniable. They were both in the care of the forest, and in the care of each other. The forest had claimed them both now. It had witnessed the girl's pain, and the wolf's compassion, and it would watch over them still. The forest always woke up slowly. Morning mist clung to the trees like a soft blanket, muffling the sounds of rustling leaves and distant birds. Among the towering pines and scattered oaks, a pack of wolves moved like silent shadows, their paws barely stirring the fallen leaves. They knew every trail, every hidden stream, every heartbeat of this ancient place. At the front of the pack walked Koda, a large silver wolf with eyes the color of winter skies. His steps were sure and quiet, leading his family through the thick undergrowth in search of food. It was a morning like any other, until he stopped. Without warning, Koda lifted his nose into the air. His body stiffened. The others, sensing his sudden alertness, froze behind him. Something unfamiliar drifted through the mist, threading its way between the trees like a whisper. It wasn't the musky scent of deer, nor the sharp tang of a fox. It wasn't the earthy smell of rain-soaked ground or fallen leaves. It was something else. It was human. Koda stood still for a long moment, analyzing the smell. It wasn't the scent of hunters, heavy with metal and smoke. It wasn't adults, who usually carried the sharp bite of sweat and fear. This was softer, fainter, fragile, even. A pup, Koda thought in a way only wolves could, not in words, but in instinct. He glanced over his shoulder. His pack waited for his decision. A younger wolf, restless, took a step forward, but Koda let out a soft, warning growl. Caution first, always caution. Carefully, Koda moved forward, following the invisible trail through the trees. His paws made no sound on the damp earth. The mist thickened around them, swirling low and cool, hiding shapes and bending shadows. The deeper they went, the stronger the scent became, threaded with something else now. Fear. The wolves moved closer together, their bodies low to the ground, their ears pricked forward. They passed a fallen tree, slipped between two giant stones, and then, just beyond a thicket of thorny bushes, Coda saw her. A little girl. She was tied to a tree, her arms wrapped awkwardly behind her back, her head drooping forward. Her hair was tangled and damp from the mist. She wore a simple yellow dress, now stained and torn at the hem. Even from where he stood, Coda could see the rise and fall of her tiny chest. Shallow, but steady. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The forest held its breath. And then Coda took a single step closer. Coda's teeth gently gripped the rough twine of the rope, his powerful jaws working carefully as he tugged at the knot. The girl was still, her wide eyes never leaving him. The tension in the air was thick, but Coda remained focused, his mind entirely on the task at hand. Every second mattered. He could feel the urgency building inside him. The girl needed to be free, and he would make sure of it. The ropes were old, frayed in places where the elements had worn them down. Coda pulled harder, trying not to be rough, but knowing he had to be swift. The pack waited in silence, their eyes scanning the forest for any sign of danger. The clearing, once peaceful, now felt heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The wolves, usually the apex predators of this land, were now protectors, guarding not just their own but an innocent child. The girl flinched slightly as Coda's claws scraped against the rope. He froze, immediately looking up at her with soft eyes, trying to reassure her with his gaze. The pack's quiet growls in the background softened, as if they understood the situation too. This wasn't a hunt. This was something different. The knot didn't loosen easily. Coda's paws ached as he worked at it, his movements precise, knowing any false move could hurt the girl. He could sense her fear, but there was also something else, something that told him she trusted him. It was a delicate balance. She was in pain, but she wasn't fighting him. There was something in her eyes, an unspoken plea that filled Coda with a protective instinct. The other wolves stood closer now, their bodies shifting with nervous energy. The forest around them was still, but Coda could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't just the girl they were worried about. It was the unknown. What had brought her here? Who had left her bound to this tree? The pack's ears twitched with every sound, every slight movement in the underbrush. They knew the forest was full of hidden dangers, and they weren't about to be caught off guard. With one last tug, Coda's teeth finally loosened the knot. The rope fell to the ground, and the girl's arms, stiff and swollen from being bound, dropped to her sides. She let out a small, shuddering breath, her shoulders trembling as she took in her newfound freedom. Coda stepped back, watching her carefully. The girl blinked, still dazed, her eyes darting between Coda and the pack. She remained silent, but for the first time since they had found her, there was a flicker of something new in her expression. Hope. The wolves watched as she slowly sank to her knees, her body still weak, but no longer trapped. Coda stayed close, ready to act at the slightest sign of danger. The forest was peaceful, a quiet, ancient world that seemed to hold its breath around them. The wolves, ever vigilant, kept their eyes trained on the shifting shadows and the soft whispers of the wind. Coda lay close to the girl, his large frame a comforting presence, his fur warm against her small, shivering body. The pack settled into a rhythm, each member alert but calm, sensing that for the moment there was no immediate danger. But Coda knew better than to trust too easily. The world outside this clearing was unpredictable. The girl, though free from her bonds, was still vulnerable. She had no idea what dangers lurked in the forest, or what had brought her here in the first place. Her past was a mystery, one that Coda couldn't yet solve. The girl, still weary from her ordeal, had finally drifted into a light sleep, her head resting on Koda's side. Her breathing was steady, though interrupted by soft, troubled sighs, as if her dreams were filled with remnants of her past. Koda kept his watchful eyes on the perimeter of the clearing, his senses sharp, attuned to every sound: the rustling of leaves, the distant chirp of birds, the crackling of the underbrush. Then, without warning, a sound broke the stillness, a snap of a twig. Koda's ears pricked, and his body tensed. The pack responded immediately, their bodies moving into defensive positions, their low growls reverberating through the air. The girl's eyes snapped open, wide with fear, and she scrambled to her feet, her muscles stiff from the hours of being bound. She had no idea what was happening, but the wolves knew. Koda moved in front of her, standing tall, his body a shield between her and whatever threat was approaching. His pack members spread out, circling the clearing, their eyes scanning the trees, their senses finely tuned to the unseen danger. The air was thick with tension, the forest itself holding its breath once more. Another snap of branches. This time, it was closer. Koda growled low in his throat, a warning that was meant for whatever approached, but no response came. The forest was still, too still, and that unsettled Koda more than any noise ever could. He could feel the pressure building, the pulse of the forest quickening, as if it too sensed something on the horizon. The girl, now wide awake and trembling, instinctively pressed closer to Koda's side, seeking the safety of the wolf's presence. Her eyes were filled with fear, but there was something else in them too, a flicker of determination. She wasn't going to run, not with the wolves around her. She trusted them, and that trust was the only thing that gave her strength now. Koda's eyes remained fixed on the trees ahead. Whatever was coming, he was ready. Koda stood motionless, his amber eyes fixed on the girl as she whispered, "Help." The sound was barely more than a breath, fragile and uncertain, but it pierced through the stillness of the forest like a call to action. The wolves, usually so in tune with the wild rhythms of the land, seemed to hesitate. They had never encountered a situation like this, one where their instincts and compassion collided. The pack remained in a loose formation, watching Koda for any sign of what to do next. The younger wolves shifted uneasily, their bodies tense, their instincts telling them to either flee or remain hidden. They were not familiar with humans, and humans rarely presented themselves in such a vulnerable state. Koda's heart beat steadily in his chest, his mind racing as he considered the small figure before him. She was so fragile, so helpless. He knew she was no threat. She hadn't moved aggressively, hadn't tried to run, and there was no sign of a weapon or any danger that could harm them. It was clear to him that she was scared, but more than that, she was lost. For a long moment, Koda stood there, his head lowered in silent thought. He was a leader, a protector, and the safety of his pack was always his first priority. But in that moment, something deep inside him told him that the girl needed him, that the pack needed to help her. There was no choice in the matter. It was not about human or wolf. It was about protecting the innocent, about compassion in the face of danger. The pack shifted uneasily, waiting for Koda's signal. With a deep, steady breath, Koda turned his head, his gaze flicking toward his pack members. A single low growl escaped his throat, not of aggression, but of command. The others fell silent, their posture shifting as they waited for their leader's next move. Koda moved closer to the girl, his body language calm and unthreatening. He could feel the girl's eyes on him, wide with both fear and wonder. Her small, trembling hands reached out to him, as if seeking reassurance, and Koda's instincts kicked in. He couldn't let her suffer any longer. Without hesitation, he crouched beside her. His breath was warm against her skin as he carefully sniffed the ropes that bound her to the tree. The scent of the rough twine and sweat filled his nose. The knots were tight, expertly tied, but not impossible to undo. He could sense the girl's fear, but there was also something else: trust. The pack remained close, their eyes alert to every sound, every movement around them. Koda glanced over his shoulder, signaling to the others. They stayed in position, silent but watchful, ensuring that no harm would come to their vulnerable charge. He focused all his attention on the task at hand, his paws delicately working at the knots. Slowly, methodically, Kota tugged at the ropes, each motion slow and careful. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. The girl needed to be free. The clearing was suffused with an eerie silence. Every wolf poised, their muscles coiled like springs. Kota's amber eyes never left the shadows beyond the trees, his body a firm barrier between the girl and the unknown danger. The wind whispered through the branches above them, a soft sigh that only deepened the tension in the air. Something was coming. The girl, still trembling, clutched the thick fur at Kota's side, her grip tight. She knew she was safe with the wolves, but the unease in her chest was hard to shake. The shadows around them seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and the girl couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching them from the darkness. Kota's ears flicked forward, his body growing more rigid with each passing moment. Then it came, a low guttural growl from the depths of the forest. It wasn't from the wolves. It was something else, something far more menacing. The pack stiffened at the sound, their growls growing louder in unison, a chorus of warning. The girl's heart raced in her chest as the growl came again, this time closer, much closer. From the shadows emerged a figure, large and hulking, its eyes gleaming in the low light. It wasn't a wolf. No, this was something different, a creature of the forest, one that hunted with an intelligence far beyond that of a typical predator. The girl's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the approaching figure, its form half hidden in the underbrush. The air seemed to grow colder as the creature stepped forward, its shape becoming clearer. A man, but not quite. His features were twisted, grotesque, his face half covered in thick, tangled hair. His eyes were the color of dark stones, cold and unblinking. The girl's eyes widened in recognition. This was the man who had bound her to the tree. This was the one who had left her there to suffer. Kota growled again, his stance unwavering as the pack gathered behind him. The creature paused, meeting Kota's gaze with a chilling smile. There was no fear in the man's eyes, only a sick, twisted amusement. He had come for her, to finish what he had started. But Kota wasn't about to let that happen. With a swift motion, he stepped forward, positioning himself between the girl and the creature, a towering wall of protection. The pack growled in unison, their voices low and menacing. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if it too knew what was at stake. The creature's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. But Kota was unyielding. His pack would protect the girl, no matter what. The final battle had begun. The girl's legs buckled beneath her as she collapsed to the ground, her body trembling from exhaustion and relief. She gasped for air, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The ropes were gone, but the marks they had left behind on her wrists were raw and red, a stark reminder of the hours, or perhaps days, she had spent bound to that tree. Her eyes, once filled with panic, now shimmered with a mix of vulnerability and gratitude. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but the wolves had freed her. They had saved her. Kota stayed close, his amber eyes never leaving her as she tried to steady herself. The air around them was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint rustle of the wind in the trees. The pack remained still, watching, waiting. They were warriors, but this was something else entirely. They had helped her, but now what? The girl looked up at Kota, her gaze still uncertain, but no longer filled with fear. There was a question in her eyes, a question that Kota couldn't answer. What would happen to her now? Would the wolves stay? Would they protect her? She reached out a trembling hand, but hesitated just before touching Kota's fur. He lowered his head, just slightly, his eyes softening as he stood perfectly still. It was a quiet reassurance, a promise that for now, she was safe with him. The girl's hand hovered for a moment longer before she slowly, carefully, reached out and brushed her fingers against Kota's thick coat. His fur was warm, and the gentle pressure of his presence seemed to calm her, even if only for a moment. She closed her eyes, letting out a long breath, a small sob escaping her lips. It was the first sound she had made since they found her, and it was a sound of relief. But even as she rested there, her back against the tree, there was a deeper fear still lingering in her eyes. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know who had left her there, tied and helpless. She didn't know if they would return. The thought made her tremble again, but she was no longer alone. Coda remained close, his body a silent protector beside her. His pack watched with silent intensity, their ears flicking at every sound in the distance, alert for any danger. For now, though, there was nothing but the sound of the girl's quiet breathing and the distant hum of the forest. As the minutes passed, Coda realized that the girl's freedom was only the first step. She wasn't safe yet. She would need more than just the wolves' protection. She would need someone to guide her through this unfamiliar world. And Coda, for the first time in his life, found himself considering the path ahead. The forest was vast, and the dangers were many. But for now, the girl was in the wolves' care. Coda's steps were slow, deliberate, as he moved closer to the little girl. The scent of her was stronger now, a mixture of earth, pine needles, and something more human. Warmth, fear. She was alive, that much was clear, but she was also very still, almost too still for comfort. The wolves remained at a distance, their instincts pulling them to stay cautious. Coda paused, his amber eyes locked on the girl. She hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound since the pack had first discovered her. There was no sign of struggle or violence, but the way her small frame hung limply against the rough bark of the tree told a different story, one of isolation, of helplessness. The mist seemed to press in closer, thickening the air around them, but Coda couldn't look away from the girl. She didn't look like one of the hunter's children, wild and full of fear. She looked lost. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt, her wide, tear-filled eyes still holding a trace of disbelief as they locked onto his. Coda's ears flicked back in thought. Something didn't feel right. He wasn't sure what it was, but deep down, he knew he couldn't leave her there. A soft whimper from one of the younger wolves broke the silence, reminding Coda that the pack was watching. Tension rippled through them, the quiet growls in their throats barely audible. Coda held up a paw to silence them, still assessing the situation. The girl didn't seem to be a threat. In fact, she was almost completely defenseless. Another slow step, and Coda was nearly within arm's reach. He could see her more clearly now, her clothes, torn and damp from the elements. There were bruises on her wrists where the rope had dug into her skin. Her shoes, if she had any, were missing. Her hair hung in tangled strands, and her cheeks were streaked with dirt and tears. She blinked, her eyes flicking over Coda's large frame, but instead of screaming or running, she did the opposite. Her eyes widened with an emotion Coda recognized, not fear this time, but confusion. And maybe curiosity. The girl's head tilted slightly, as though trying to figure out if he was real or if the mist had made her imagination run wild. Coda crouched down, lowering his head to her level. His movements were slow, careful, every action deliberate to show her he wasn't a threat. The other wolves stayed close, their eyes scanning the forest around them for any sign of danger, but they too were quiet now, sensing the shift in the air. The little girl blinked again. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out at first. Coda's ears flicked forward in curiosity. What would she say? What would she do? Then, finally, her voice came, a small, fragile whisper that barely reached his ears. Help.